Hey guys, so today we're picking up where we left off, or where you left off with the first part of this activity, the research methods part one, and kind of building off the work that you did with either your Lucidchart or your Google Draw in your notebook, where the librarian was kind of talking to you about how to think of your like conversation and your research as this sort of like main question that's like what the conversation is about. But within that, in order to branch off, there's a lot of things that you have to figure out. So trying to break that down into more like researchable bite-sized questions, because if you just search the same keywords for the same big question over and over again, you're actually going to miss out on a lot of on a lot of information, on a lot of background, on a lot of like really specific sources. So we're going to kind of build off of that work and talk about that. So you're just going to be adding things, actually just using the chart or the Google drawing you were already doing, and the list of keywords you were already working on, and we're just going to build off of that. So a couple of goals for what we're going to be doing today are, first, again, just to build off the work that you began, like with the librarian, to create some, I guess, stronger like search efficiency and some stronger search like literacy. I know it doesn't seem like it would be a skill to Google something, but it actually like it there's a lot of skills and strategies involved in being really efficient and really effective at being able to get at the sources that you want and the things that you want. When you're doing like a Google search or any kind of search, like when you're using the databases, there's a lot of skills and strategies included in not just like citation chasing, but in filtering and knowing what kind of document you're looking for, where to go to find the right topic that you're looking for, how to use like your like headings and like suggested subjects and things like that. Even down to like being able to filter for like certain like years and dates to be able to find what you're looking for, to be able to use those like Boolean search terms to say like I want this and that but not that, and to really be clear about what you're looking for, to understand the use of keywords and specific search questions for inquiry, so to practice that critical reading of being guided by your questions, and figuring out how to search for those questions and develop those keywords and start creating that habit of mind, to be able to come up with the right kinds of terms, or be able to brainstorm like new ways of searching for something or new ways of saying what it is you're looking for. To again like brainstorm specific questions to break down your research, so to build off of what you started in the lab with the library activity, and to stay away from the research spiral where you're searching the same terms and getting the same results, and lots of headaches that just come in like ever increasing increments as you just search for the same stuff over and over and over again and get the same results and the same information over and over and over again. We're going to start with actually brainstorming some more research questions, and some keywords, and then kind of moving on from there. And when I say we're going to break this down into smaller research questions, like you have your big question, that's like what your LOI is about. But when I say like we need to hear the whole conversation and we need to know that we're getting at all these different voices and all these different like genres of sources and all these different types of information, in order to, I guess, like synthesize and figure out how your sources are speaking to each other and what they prove or don't prove, you have to have a lot. Like you can't make connections until you have things to connect, right? So you have to have like what's happening now with it, what's happened previously with it, what do different groups think about it, what does research show from scholars, where are there like shared concerns. Like there's a lot of information to know, I guess. So one of the things we're doing with this is breaking down your LOI, or I'll call it your LOI from now on, your line of inquiry, like the direction you're going into, the conversation you're looking at, into different aspects of the issue, into history, terms, studies, perspectives, to break down this big complex concept into what I call Googleable questions, like concrete things I can look up, not like why do people do this, or like how does this happen. Getting away from things that are like as broad, and thinking about like what are the concerns of this perspective, what happened at in this event? What does this law mean? Like things you can Google and get specific information about. So you can start, I guess what's hard is before you can even put the puzzle together, you have to figure out what the puzzle pieces are. So I guess right now by coming up with the questions, you're figuring out what the pieces are that go into the puzzle so you can figure out how to put them together. It's also going to help get a well-rounded look at the issue because you're going to be trying to seek more like information and expertise about the whole conversation, so you can start evaluating and weighing what's biased and what's not, what's credible and what's not, and place yourself in that conversation later and kind of redirect your focus away from just opinions and binary thinking. One of the reasons you want to stay away from wording your question in a way that's biased, which is something that we talk about, is because questions are gestural. They use the gestural mode. They lead you in a certain direction. So if you're asking questions that are focused on a certain perspective, that's what you're going to find. If you're asking questions assuming an answer, then you're going to find exactly what you set out to look for. And I think I guess a good example of that would be like if people are asking questions about like, I've had people try to look into like, is college worth it? Well, if you're already assuming that it is worth it and you're wording your questions around that, you're going to find what you set out to find. If you and that's one of the reasons we also looked into what your biases were coming in. If you assume that college isn't worth it, you're likely to word all of your questions around that, and then you're going to find what you think. And also kind of making it less, I guess, less simplified. We tend to want to simplify issues by labeling everything as like for, against, right or wrong, this side, that side. And so you're setting yourself up to just look for, against, which is based around opinions, rather than looking underneath the surface at the information that causes people to have those opinions. You're going to find opinions either way. You don't have to frame your research around it. They're definitely going to come up, as you've noticed already. It also is going to help you like inquire into different perspectives you might be aware of. Don't just assume that you already know what the perspectives are. You have to go seeking for those to make sure that you're getting at everything that's there. Some examples of some focused research questions. I'm going to do how does standardized testing impact learning, my go-to example. One, I would have to know what standardized testing is meant to accomplish. Like, what are the reasons that we use testing in the first place? What is it supposed to do? What do like the trends show in terms of how we're using it? Are we testing more or less? How has the use of standardized testing been affected by No Child Left Behind? Or the more recent law, I think it's Every Student Succeeds or something like that. If you don't know anything about these two laws, then you don't know this issue because they are what like set up how we use the testing in the first place. So you'd have to look up that. There it is, Every Student Succeeds Act. I was wrong. But Every Student Succeeds Act, how are these two laws different? What are they? So you have to know a lot about that. What has been the impact of Common Core? So you have to look up Common Core, like specifically, No Child Left Behind specifically. And sometimes we don't do that. We want to just start standardized testing and learning over and over and over again, and that's the spiral. What are some examples of standardized tests and when are they used? Like your EOGs versus your SATs and things like that. How does testing differ in private schools versus alternative education? So do we do it differently depending on like the school? How does it correlate with negative learning outcomes? Like, are there studies that show negative or positive learning outcomes? Or you could just search learning outcomes. Do educators think they're helpful? So like, what from a first-hand account do educators experience in the classroom versus what the researchers say? Are they really associated with the rise in attention deficit disorder? Because I've heard that, so you would need to look that up. What are the alternatives for measuring learning? So if we're not going to use testing, or if we're not going to use this to measure learning, what are we going to do? What are some other options for that? And I know like mastery learning is something that people have come up with. So here's a lot of questions I could ask that are going to help me figure out how standardized testing impacts learning. So here's a little research questions brainstorming activity you're going to do to try to build off of some of the work you did in the library. And I want you to kind of think about also like the ideas I've given you here also kind of tie into some of the categories that you have already in your annotated bibs. You could consider those too. You have your current conversation section, which is like things happening now. So different like perspectives that exist now, their concerns, current news, things like that. Your primary sources versus and like firsthand accounts. You have your like background stuff that you would need to know. So well, you can kind of think about that also, but I want you to add at least 3 questions using some of the ideas that I'm providing here. And a couple of tips with these questions are to be really specific and concrete. Avoid being using broad and abstract wording. Again, like your question is already big. So if you're asking like, why does this happen? Or why do people think this? Then that's not super like Googleable, you know? That's still pretty vague. So you want to ask questions that are specific and focused and use terms that you can search. So rather than saying like why do people think this, you could ask like, what are the concerns of this group? And then that gives you something a little bit more concrete. So avoid the big abstract vague wording even in we tried to avoid it even in our big questions. So certainly avoid it in your like little questions because they're supposed to be what's helping like break it down and make it more searchable. So you're going to add, maybe there's some history of the issue you come across that you're unaware of, or maybe you're not aware of the history of the issue at all and you want to start there. Current situation or example. So do you have enough like news, firsthand accounts, things like that? Questions about people involved. And so for instance, you might have like certain specific like researchers or speakers or politicians or names that have come up. I think when I do standardized testing, like Ken Robinson, excuse me, and Sal Khan from the Khan Academy come up a lot. So they might be specific people I would look up with standardized testing to see what they have to say. Questions about organizations maybe, or companies or news sources that you've come across, government organizations, groups, things like that. Specific terms or phrases you've come across if they're like disciplinary or issue specific and you don't know much about them. Current policies or laws. So for instance, like standardized testing, looking up like No Child Left Behind or Every Student Succeeds, that kind of stuff. Types of information you don't have. Maybe you still need to look up like a study, or you want an interview, or you want a documentary, and you can add those terms in, or ask a specific question about that. Questions about concerns, motivation, or experiences of certain groups. So your question at this point could be like, what are different perspectives? If you know of what what those perspectives are, you could ask like, what are the concerns of this group? To maybe try to get at that a little bit more. And again, you can get more specific and you'll continue to generate questions, but you need kind of a springboard of some places to go first. So 3 new questions. So we're going to get into a little bit more here about keyword brainstorming. So here's where you were from the library activity. You went over some keywords. You may have to use a Google and the databases, and you took your big question and maybe got like a couple of concepts. If you haven't done this yet, you could start here and do it now because we're going to use this in just a minute. And their example was for their question about like international students and microaggressions. They picked like microaggressions, international students, college campuses. Remember, synonyms are super important because it's only, Google's only going to spit back what you say for the most part. So you might search things like implicit bias, racial insensitivity, racial discrimination, prejudice, stereotypes, and come up with some different ways to say those terms. And you want to do that for the terms that are in your big question, and that was where she had you start. So I'm going to have you build off of that. So 1, if you haven't done this yet, you need to do it now. So where we're going to start here is just talking about like a couple of reasons kind of behind this work with your keywords. Because I know it can seem pretty tedious, I guess, like coming up with this list. One of the things it does is having to do it and see it in practice and create that list kind of helps you create that habit of mind of how to be thinking about it and kind of just create that habit of mind moving forward. So of course your search terms are going to include the obvious keywords that you need to look up. maybe some of the more obscure, like disciplinary specific terms you've already used. But primarily what you do with the librarian was came up with the terms that are just for your big question, like the things that you would probably use first when you go to Google. And you also did a little bit of work with synonyms. And one of the things to think about is that a lot of things, I know like with Google, it doesn't always search synonyms for you. It searches the words that you put in. It can do a little bit of guessing, but it's not as effective as thinking about how, if you're not getting what you want, how to reword it and use a similar term that you might find. You know, for instance, if you're searching for like youth and body image, the article you're looking for might not, or a really good article might be out there that doesn't use the word youth, that uses adolescent. Or it's talking specifically about teen girls, or it's talking about a specific type of media, or it doesn't talk about like body image, it says self-esteem. And you're going to miss out on those terms because you didn't search for those terms. You searched for these. So if you're constantly thinking about how can I reword this? What else can I say? You're going to get at better information. And one of the things to think about, one of the goals, I'm kind of skipping down here, is it kind of helps you filter and be able to, I guess, speak Google search a little bit more. Helps you figure out how to ask the right questions to get at what you want. Because if you're just searching the same terms over and over again, you're going to end up with like 50,000 results in just list after list after list. And the goal is just to be able to work just off those first 2 pages, to be able to just switch up what you want, what you're looking for, and get the results you're looking for in different types of sources onto those first couple of pages. So you're actually doing it more efficiently, faster, and getting better stuff. We're going to talk more about this. I'll give you a reminder later, not to search evaluative terms like good, bad, effective, ineffective, because Google's going to then search for that word. So if you are looking for like, so if I'm talking about like standardized testing and I say standardized testing negative results, well, it's going to look for the word negative. If I just take out negative and I just say standardized testing learning, and I don't have anything evaluative in there, it's going to spit back good, bad, ugly, and then I'm probably going to be more apt to get like a range of perspectives instead of just searching for that word. So you really want to pull, especially in your early searching, once you get to the paper and you're really looking for something to support like a specific like perspective or illustrate, that's when you can really start putting those terms in. But early on, you really kind of shoot yourself in the foot by adding in things that are going to limit what you find. So here might be an example. When I was talking about getting a list of like these search terms, I want you to think about some of the ways you can manipulate it. So this is a list that I might use for standardized testing. I might come up with things like, of course, standardized testing, and I think I've got learning in here. There's some different ways you can search, and we'll go through some of these tips a little bit later also. Sorry. You could search for professors or teachers to get perspectives. You could search for certain laws related to it, like No Child Left Behind. I think the new one is Every Child Succeeds or something like that. You could search for outcomes. You could search for specific types of standardized tests like SATs. I'm going to show you this one, how you can take out .com sites or take out things you don't want to see anymore. You could search for certain domains, like you could put in standardized testing and .edu to get education sources, or .gov, and it helps search for those domains. You can search, EOGs. You can search for certain people that come up. 3 names that come up a lot are like Saul Kahn and Ken Robinson. When you're talking about standardized testing, they're really big voices, so you might be able to search for those. You can search for certain types of sources that you're looking for, like I want a documentary, so I'll search standardized testing documentary, or article, or news, or study. Or different types of education, like how does standardized testing work in like public versus private school, or elementary, or open education, or Montessori. I know this is a mouthful, but just so you can see, there's lots of different ways you can search and filter and really specify what it is you're looking for and what you need. So here's where we're going to start with this activity. Okay. So step 1, you need to be in your notebook now, if you're not already, which you should be. is you're going to add the keywords for your new questions. I guess you can use like any of your smaller questions, but you've already done like a couple of keywords for your big questions. So you want to look at some of your smaller questions now, and try to come up with some search terms for those. As many synonyms as you can think of. Like if you have teen, then you can use youth, adolescent. So if I'm I'm actually going to go back a little bit here so I can kind of show you what I mean. If you're looking at these questions that I showed you earlier, I'm talking about looking at standardized testing and No Child Left Behind. And instead of looking at this question up here where you were, I'm talking about looking at this one and putting, okay, standardized test, No Child Left Behind. Or coming down here and saying like standardized test, learning outcomes, and pulling some keywords from those smaller questions to help you think about some different ways to search and get at more specific information. So I want you just to take a few minutes. You can maybe pause this, it might not take that long, and try to come up with as many synonyms as you can think of. Step 2 is going to be to go backwards. One of the things that we talked about, I know I talked with a lot of you about in your workshops, was that you sometimes have to get that really general information as part of like your context. So that's why, when I'm thinking about standardized testing, I may have to take a step back and look at like reasons for testing. Which, the word test might seem pretty general, but I might need that information in order to answer the bigger question. So you may have to get like kind of broad if you're talking about like something related to, I don't know, like the weather or climate. If you're talking about like, wildfires, or you're talking about like deforestation, you might need to look up global warming, which again seems big, but you might need that information because it could be related. If you're talking about, I guess, I think something else someone has like colorism, you may need to do some work not just with colorism, but maybe also kind of broaden out and talk about like issues with like the history of racism here, because that's also correlated. So again, taking a step back and getting general terms. So like global warming, maybe like weather, environment, pollution, standardized testing, education, assessment, learning, testing. Some of those general words that are going to get at one of those pieces in our annotated bibliography, the background, the context, the how did we get to this conversation stuff. What do I need to understand in order to, like if I'm a reader looking at your annotated bibliography, what are the things I need to understand in order to understand this issue? Like in order to talk about this issue, what do I need to know? So if we're thinking about like polarization and social media and politics, you may have to start with like looking up like the current political environment, and just kind of getting more general in those ways, just to get that context and that background and think about what are the basics that we need to know. The last one is to get specific. You notice that I looked at that when I was doing standardized testing, I talked about, like I included some names, some types of tests. If you're looking at things like social media, you may have to do some specific research naming the platform, not just saying social media, but saying Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, because the article might not say social media, it might say Twitter, or it might say Instagram, and then you've missed out. If you're talking about news and bias, if you're just searching news, you might not get at what you need. But if you choose like specific media platforms and news platforms on both sides of the political spectrum, you're going to get probably more at what you need, because you're going to find critiques of specific news platforms. So for news media like New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, standardized testing, some maybe test types, the names themselves of the like policies that have been passed, some of the like names of important people that come up. So I want you to get at those kind of other synonyms for some of your smaller questions, and then getting at some general terms and some specific terms, and really growing that list again, just to kind of create that habit of mind. I do have a very specific like inquiry example that I'm going to talk about just for a second, because I think it kind of relates to what you're doing also. I wrote for some of my graduate work, I wrote a published and award-winning thesis on Louise Erdrich's reservation novels, which you probably don't know anything about, but that's okay. And connecting that to her adolescent historical fiction series, the Birchbark books. So here's how I had to break that down. Like, I didn't know, I had to ask a question. I was just looking for connections. Connections. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a thesis. I was trying to figure out what my thesis was going to be. Were there even any connections between these two series that are these two types of books that she wrote about the same topic? I'm assuming that they were about the same topic. There were going to be connections. So I had to spend, like, for real, an entire freaking semester reading 4 to 5 of her reservation novels with lots of writing weekly about those. The Birchbark books series with lots of writing. Sorry, back and forth. I had to research the history of the Ojibwe or Chippewa, because that was the like tribe in the area that she was writing about, especially regarding like health, historical relocation, the economy, prominent themes that come up in her writing. I had to research the culture of the Ojibwe, especially regarding supernatural beliefs, loss of cultural identity over history, and discrimination, more prominent themes. But again, I had to read both books. I had to look at also like critiques of her work and what people had to say about her work. So the primary examples and the secondary stuff I had to look at. I had to get into some tertiary stuff in order to just learn, like, what is the culture? What is all of this? I had to do so much research and all these different puzzle pieces. And when I had all the pieces, like, it came together and I found something to say. And one of my fears was like, what if I don't have something to say? What if I don't get to a thesis? And I think what you want to think about in this project is that your question is like a springboard. It tells you what the conversation is and what people are talking about. All the things people are talking about, they all are saying really specific things. They're not all just answering that question, and you don't need to either. It's possible by the time we get to the digital essay for your essay to be a contribution to that conversation, but it could be a specific contribution. It doesn't necessarily have to be an answer to the bigger question. It just needs to contribute to the conversation about that question. And you'll be able to figure that out. Again, like, you have to trust the process. Like, you'll figure out what to say when you get there. I did, and one of the things I kept saying was, what if I do all this research and I still don't have anything to say? But I did, and you will too. And that's all for this one. So exit out of here, go into the next video, which is some intro like search tips for using Google, and it's going to help you sort of check, revise, add some things to the list of brainstorming you've already been doing. Peace.